The moment Isaac Ashton stepped into his sister's graduation party, he knew he would rather be anywhere else. 300 guests milled around the sprawling gardens of his family estate, champagne flutes glinting in the late May sunshine as a string quartet played a tasteful rendition of a pop song he vaguely recognized. At 32, Isaac had perfected the art of appearing engaged while mentally reviewing quarterly reports from his shipping empire. Tonight, however, his well-practiced social mask felt particularly heavy. "There's my favorite brother." A voice cut through his thoughts as Olivia, radiant in her graduation dress, bounded toward him. "I was worried you wouldn't make it. Miss my baby sister's graduation?" "Never," Isaac replied, embracing her tightly. The 7-year age gap between them had always made him feel more like a protective guardian than a sibling, especially after their parents' messy divorce when Olivia was just 10. "You look exhausted," she said, scrutinizing his face. "Please tell me you're not planning to hide in a corner all night sending emails." "I've silenced my phone. See?" He pulled it from his pocket to display the screen. "I'm fully present, promise?" Olivia grinned. "Good, because there's someone I want you to meet. My best friend from the psychology program. She's brilliant and Liv, I've told you 1,000 times to stop playing matchmaker," Isaac interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "Who said anything about matchmaking?" Olivia's feigned innocence wasn't fooling him. "She's just someone I think you'd get along with. She's actually helped me through some tough times these past few years." Before Isaac could protest further, Olivia was tugging him through the crowd. They weaved between elegantly dressed guests, many of whom stopped him with congratulatory words for his sister or questions about his latest business acquisition. Isaac nodded politely but didn't slow his stride, allowing Olivia to guide him toward the central fountain. That's when he saw her. She stood slightly apart from a group of graduates, her head tilted back in laughter at something someone had said. Her dark hair cascaded down her back in loose waves, and her emerald dress caught the fading sunlight in a way that made it seem as though she were glowing from within. "Kai." Olivia called out, waving enthusiastically. The woman turned, and Isaac felt something shift inside him, a strange, unfamiliar sensation, as though someone had suddenly altered his center of gravity. "Isaac, this is Katerina Zima. Kat, my brother Isaac." Katerina extended her hand, and her touch was cool against his palm. "The famous Isaac Ashton. Olivia talks about you constantly." Her voice carried the slightest hint of an accent he couldn't quite place, and her eyes, a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold, met his with a directness that was both refreshing and disarming. "All good things, I hope," he said, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. "Mostly," she replied with a small smile that suggested otherwise. "Kat's starting her PhD in cognitive psychology this fall," Olivia explained. "She's been my study partner, therapist, and shoulder to cry on through 4 years of undergrad." "Hardly a therapist," Katerina corrected. "Just a good listener with an unlimited supply of coffee and chocolate." "Don't let her modesty fool you," Olivia continued. "She's already published research on decision-making under pressure. Some major consulting firms have been trying to recruit her." Isaac found himself genuinely interested, a welcome change from the polite boredom he usually experienced during social events. "What drew you to that particular field?" "The same thing that probably drives you in business," Katerina answered. "Trying to understand why people do what they do, especially when the stakes are high." Before he could respond, Olivia was pulled away by a group of classmates wanting photos, leaving Isaac and Katerina alone by the fountain. "So," Katerina said, filling the silence, "Olivia tells me you built your company from scratch. That's impressive." She exaggerates. "I had advantages, family connections, good education. And yet many people with those same advantages accomplish nothing exceptional." Her observation was matter of fact, not flattering. "What about you?" Isaac asked, keen to shift the conversation away from himself. "Why psychology?" I grew up watching my father make terrible decisions that hurt our family, she said, surprising him with her candor. I wanted to understand why smart people sometimes act against their own interests. Turns out, the human brain is a fascinating mess of contradictions. They talked for what felt like minutes but must have been much longer, because the garden lights had come on and the crowd had thinned considerably. Katerina spoke about her research with passion, gesturing expressively with hands that bore small calluses from writing. She explained, as she still preferred handwritten notes to typing. Isaac found himself telling her about the early days of his shipping business, stories he rarely shared. How he'd taken a small inheritance after college and invested in a single cargo vessel when the shipping industry was at its lowest. How he'd lived on that ship for the first year, learning every aspect of the operation while slowly building what would become Ashton Maritime International. You must have made some poor decisions along the way, she said. Everyone does. Hundreds, Isaac admitted, but the worst were always when I ignored my instincts about people. Interesting. In my research, I've found that trusting pure instinct can be just as problematic as ignoring it entirely. Are you analyzing me, Dr. Zima? He asked, amused. Not yet, she replied with a smile that made his pulse quicken. But I reserve the right to do so later. Their conversation flowed effortlessly until Olivia returned, eyebrows raised in surprise at finding them still deep in discussion. Sorry to interrupt, but Dad's looking for you, Isaac. Something about introducing you to his new business partner. Isaac nodded, reluctantly excusing himself. As he walked away, he glanced back to see Katerina watching him, her expression thoughtful. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Isaac found his attention repeatedly drawn to her. She moved through the party with quiet confidence, engaging easily with strangers yet never seeming to seek the spotlight. When the celebration finally wound down near midnight, he realized with disappointment that she had departed without saying goodbye, looking for someone. Olivia appeared at his side, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Just making sure you're enjoying your party, he deflected, MMHMM. His sister wasn't buying it. Kat had to leave early. She's presenting at a conference tomorrow. She's certainly dedicated, Isaac commented, aiming for casual indifference. She also asked for your number, Olivia added, her smile widening. I told her I'd ask if it was okay to share it. Isaac hesitated only briefly. Yes, that's fine. The text came 2 days later, as Isaac was finishing a conference call in his downtown office. This is Katerina Zima from Olivia's graduation. I'm conducting research on decision-making in successful entrepreneurs and wondered if you might be willing to participate in an interview. Strictly professional, of course. Isaac read the message twice, a smile forming. Strictly professional. He typed his response carefully. I'd be happy to contribute to your research. When did you have in mind? They arranged to meet the following week at a quiet cafe near his office building. Isaac arrived early, choosing a corner table that offered some privacy. He had dressed more casually than usual, exchanging his typical suit for dark jeans and a well-fitted button-down shirt. He told himself it was because this wasn't a business meeting, but he knew there was more to it. Katerina arrived precisely on time, dressed in a simple blouse and pencil skirt, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a worn leather messenger bag and a small recording device. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said after they'd exchanged greetings. Most executives of your caliber are impossible to pin down. Happy to help advance science, he replied with a slight smile, though I'm curious why you chose me specifically. You built a billion-dollar company in an industry that was struggling when you entered it, she said, setting up her recorder. And you did it without destroying competitors or exploiting workers, quite the opposite, in fact. Your company has some of the highest employee satisfaction ratings in the shipping industry. You've done your research, Isaac observed, impressed and slightly disconcerted by her thoroughness. That's my job. She smiled briefly before becoming professional again. May I begin recording? For the next hour, Katerina asked incisive questions about his decision-making processes, his risk assessment strategies, how he handled failure, and what factors he considered when making major business moves. Isaac found himself revealing more than he typically would in interviews, discussing not just successes but significant missteps, moments of doubt, and the isolation that sometimes came with leadership. "Last question," she said finally. "What decision in your life are you most proud of making?" Isaac considered for a moment. "Walking away from my father's company to start my own," he said finally. "Everyone told me I was crazy to reject a guaranteed executive position in an established corporation, but I knew I'd never respect myself if I took the easy path." Katerina nodded, switching off the recorder. "Thank you, that was incredibly helpful." "My turn for a question," Isaac said as she packed up her equipment. "Was this really just for research?" She looked up, her expression unreadable. "What else would it be?" "I thought perhaps Olivia put you up to this." Katerina's laugh was genuine. "No, though she did mention you might think that." She hesitated, then added, "I will admit I found our conversation at the graduation party interesting. Professional curiosity combined with personal interest, perhaps." The honesty of her admission caught him off guard. Most people in his world were strategic with their words, always calculating advantage. "In that case," he said, "would you consider having dinner with me sometime? No research agenda required." "I'd like that," she replied, her smile reaching her eyes. Their first proper date was at a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, far from the upscale establishments where Isaac was likely to be recognized. Katerina arrived wearing a simple red dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. The casual elegance of her appearance made Isaac glad he'd left his usual power suits at home. Over plates of handmade pasta, they discovered shared interests in classical music and historical fiction, debated the merits of various travel destinations, and laughed about their respective academic journeys. Isaac learned that Katerina had grown up in Boston after her family emigrated from Croatia when she was 5, that she played the cello badly by her own admission, and that she harbored a secret love for cheesy disaster movies. "The worse the special effects, the better," she confessed, grinning over her glass of wine. In turn, he told her about his childhood passion for building model ships, how he'd spent a summer working as a deckhand to learn the shipping business from the ground up, and his ongoing battle with his executive team over his habit of personally answering customer complaint emails. "They say it's not a scalable use of my time," he said, mimicking his COO's disapproving tone, "but you keep doing it anyway. Some things matter more than efficiency." As the evening progressed, Isaac realized he hadn't checked his phone, once a rare occurrence for someone who typically remained tethered to work even during social events. With Katerina, time seemed to flow differently, minutes stretching into hours without notice. Walking her to her apartment later that night, Isaac felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his college days. At her doorstep, their conversation finally faltered into silence. "I had a wonderful time," Katerina said softly. "So did I." Isaac hesitated, then leaned down to kiss her cheek, a gesture that felt both insufficient and appropriate for a first date. Katerina turned her head slightly at the last moment, catching the corner of his mouth with hers. The brief contact sent a current through him that had nothing to do with physical attraction alone. "Good night, Isaac," she said, a slight flush coloring her cheeks as she unlocked her door. "Good night, Katerina." He walked back to his car feeling lighter than he had in years. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm of dinner dates, museum visits, and long walks through the city. Isaac found himself rearranging meetings and delegating tasks he would normally handle personally, all to create more time with Katerina. His executive team noticed the change, exchanging knowing looks when he left the office before 7 or declined weekend conference calls. For her part, Katerina seemed equally invested, sharing aspects of her life and work with a candor that suggested genuine trust. She brought him to academic functions where she introduced him simply as Isaac, with no mention of his business success, and he appreciated the rare opportunity to be valued for something other than his net worth. 6 weeks into their relationship, Isaac invited Katerina to accompany him to a charity gala where he was being honored for his company's environmental initiatives. It would be their first appearance together at a high-profile event, and he was uncharacteristically anxious about how she would react to the public side of his life. "You don't have to come," he told her the evening before, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse apartment watching the sunset. "These events can be tedious and the press will probably be there. Are you embarrassed to be seen with me?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. "God, no," he said quickly. "The opposite, actually. I'm worried you'll see that world and decide it's not for you." The questions, the assumptions people make, the constant scrutiny. Katerina reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. "I study human behavior for a living, Isaac. I'm pretty good at handling people, even nosy ones." The gala was held at the city's Natural History Museum, its grand hall transformed with elegant decorations and soft lighting. As they entered, Isaac felt Katerina tense slightly beside him. "Okay," he murmured. "Just taking it in," she replied, squeezing his hand. "It's not every day I walk into a room where the combined net worth could fund a small nation." Isaac laughed, relaxing. "Wait until you try the canapés. Somehow they always manage to make them both tiny and tasteless." Throughout the evening, Katerina charmed his business associates and handled probing questions from socialites with graceful deflection. When a particularly persistent reporter cornered them to ask if the mysterious woman on Isaac Ashton's arm was the one to finally tame the shipping tycoon, Katerina smiled serenely. "I find the premise of your question fascinating," she said. "It suggests powerful men need taming, as though success and ambition were wild animals rather than human qualities. Have you considered how that framing perpetuates outdated gender dynamics?" The reporter blinked, momentarily speechless, then hurriedly changed the subject. Later, as they swayed together on the dance floor, Isaac held her closer than was strictly appropriate for such a public setting. "You handled that reporter brilliantly," he murmured against her hair. "Psychology degrees occasionally have practical applications," she replied with a small laugh. "Though I suspect I've just ensured that tomorrow's society page will describe me as prickly or intellectual." "Does that bother you?" She pulled back slightly to look at him. "Does it bother you? Your life is much more public than mine." "No," he said honestly. "I like that you don't filter yourself to please others." The music changed to a slower piece, and Katerina rested her head against his shoulder as they continued dancing. In that moment, surrounded by the glittering elite of the city, Isaac realized with sudden clarity that he was falling in love with her. The thought should have terrified him. His last serious relationship had ended badly 3 years earlier, when he discovered his girlfriend had been feeding information about his business dealings to a competitor. Since then, he had kept his relationships casual and brief, never allowing anyone close enough to see beyond the successful businessman persona he presented to the world. Yet with Katerina, the walls he had carefully constructed seemed to dissolve without effort. She saw him clearly, his drive, his flaws, his occasional arrogance, and stayed anyway. More than stayed, she challenged him, made him laugh, and created space in his life for something beyond work. "You're thinking very loudly," Katerina said, interrupting his thoughts. "Sorry. Just contemplating how someone who studies decision-making for a living ended up with possibly the most work-obsessed man in the city." "Ah, well," she smiled up at him. "Even experts sometimes make choices based on emotion rather than logic." 2 days after the gala, their relationship faced its first real test. Isaac was preparing for a crucial meeting when his phone rang with Olivia's number. "Hey, Liv, can I call you back? I'm heading into Isaac, it's about Kat." His sister's voice was tight with worry. "She was in a car accident this morning. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. How bad? Not life-threatening, but she's pretty banged up. Broken arm, concussion, lots of bruises. She's at Mercy Hospital. Isaac was already grabbing his keys. I'm on my way. He called his COO from the car, instructing him to take over the meeting, then broke several traffic laws getting to the hospital. When he arrived at Katerina's room, he found her propped up in bed, her left arm in a cast and a spectacular bruise blooming across her right cheekbone. "You didn't have to come," she said when she saw him, her voice slightly slurred from pain medication. "I know you had that big meeting today. The meeting can wait." Isaac moved to her side, carefully taking her uninjured hand. "What happened?" Taxi got T-boned at an intersection. Driver ran a red light. She attempted a smile that turned into a wince. "The good news is I have excellent new data for my study on decision-making under pressure. Turns out when you think you're about to die, your brain makes some fascinating shortcuts." "Not funny," Isaac said, though he felt a wave of relief at her attempt at humor. If she could joke, she would be okay. "Sorry, deflection is my coping mechanism." She squeezed his hand. "I'm really okay, Isaac, just sore and annoyed about the cast, 6 weeks of not being able to write properly." Isaac stayed with her through the discharge process and insisted on taking her to his apartment rather than her walk up with its 3 flights of stairs. "This is ridiculous," she protested weakly as he settled her in his guest room. "I can manage at my own place." "Humor me," he said. "Besides, my housekeeper makes the best chicken soup in the city. Medicinal properties guaranteed." Over the next few days, Isaac reorganized his schedule to work from home as much as possible, setting up a temporary office in his living room while Katerina recuperated in the guest room. His executive team was shocked when he announced he would be unavailable for in-person meetings for the remainder of the week, something that hadn't happened since the company's founding. On the 3rd evening, he brought dinner to the guest room on a tray to find Katerina sitting up against the pillows, looking frustrated as she struggled to type one-handed on her laptop. "The doctors said to rest," he reminded her, setting down the tray. "My brain refuses to cooperate," she sighed. "I keep thinking about my research deadline. Can I help? I could type while you dictate." She looked surprised by the offer. "Don't you have your own work?" "I've discovered something interesting this week," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The company continues to function even when I'm not micromanaging every decision. Apparently, I've hired competent people." "Who knew?" Katerina laughed, then winced as the movement jarred her bruised ribs. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Taking care of someone else for a change." "Is that so strange? For most successful men I've known." "Yes," she set aside her laptop. "They're happy to solve problems with money, hiring help, calling in specialists, but actual hands on caregiving, that's beneath their pay grade." "I'm not most men," Isaac said simply. "No," she agreed, her expression softening. "You're not." Later that night, after Katerina had fallen asleep, Isaac sat in his home office reviewing quarterly projections but finding it difficult to focus. His thoughts kept returning to the woman sleeping down the hall and how quickly she had become essential to his life. It should have frightened him, this sudden vulnerability. Instead, he felt an unexpected peace, as though something that had been misaligned in his life had finally shifted into its proper place. By the time Katerina's cast came off 6 weeks later, she had all but moved into Isaac's apartment. Her books mingled with his on the shelves. Her favorite tea occupied a permanent spot in his kitchen cabinet, and her cello, which she did indeed play badly but with great enthusiasm, stood in the corner of his living room. The transition had happened so naturally that neither of them had formally acknowledged it until the evening after her cast removal, when they sat on his balcony sharing a bottle of wine to celebrate her recovery. "I should probably start moving my things back to my apartment," she said, watching him over the rim of her glass. "Now that I can manage the stairs again." Isaac felt a sudden tightness in his chest at the thought of her leaving. "Or you could stay," he said quietly. "Permanently." Katerina set down her wine, her expression serious. Isaac, we haven't even said I love you yet. I love you, he said immediately, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. I think I have since that first night at Olivia's graduation party. A slow smile spread across her face. That's very impulsive for someone who prides himself on careful decision-making. Sometimes you just know, he said, reaching for her hand. What about you? Has your research given you any insights on this particular decision? My research suggests that life's most important choices rarely follow logical frameworks, she replied, interlacing her fingers with his. And that the decisions we regret most are the ones we don't make out of fear. Is that a yes? That's an I love you too, she said, leaning forward to kiss him. And yes, I'll stay. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Isaac took Katerina back to the fountain where they'd first met at Olivia's graduation party. The garden was quieter now, the summer flowers replaced by hardy chrysanthemums and ornamental grasses that swayed in the gentle breeze. Why are we here? Katerina asked, curious but smiling as she followed him to the fountain's edge. I wanted to come back to where it all started, Isaac said, suddenly nervous despite weeks of planning. The place where my life changed course. Bit dramatic, don't you think? She teased, but her expression softened as she noticed his seriousness. Maybe, he acknowledged, but it's true. I came to Olivia's graduation out of obligation, thinking it would be just another social event to endure. Then I met you, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about my life, my priorities, was up for reevaluation. Isaac, let me finish, he said gently, taking both her hands in his. You study decision-making for a living, so you understand better than most how we humans rationalize and second-guess and overthink. But there are moments when clarity cuts through all that noise. Meeting you was one of those moments for me. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Katerina's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a vintage emerald ring surrounded by tiny diamonds. I chose emerald because it reminds me of how you looked that first night, he explained. Like you were capturing all the light in the garden. It's beautiful, she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Katerina Zima, Isaac said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart, will you marry me? Yes, she answered without hesitation, a brilliant smile breaking across her face. My research very clearly indicates this is the optimal decision. Isaac laughed as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Later that evening, as they celebrated with champagne in their apartment, Katerina's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Your sister wants to know if you popped the question yet, she said, showing him the message. Tell her mission accomplished, Isaac replied, pulling Katerina onto his lap. And that her matchmaking skills have been duly noted. I'll also mention that my research project on successful entrepreneurs has taken an unexpected personal turn, Katerina said with a grin. My dissertation committee is going to have questions about my methodology. Tell them it was a longitudinal study with a sample size of 1, Isaac suggested, brushing a strand of hair from her face. With extremely thorough observation techniques. Very thorough, she agreed, leaning in to kiss him again. 1 year later, Isaac stood at the altar of a small chapel filled with their closest friends and family. As Katerina walked toward him in a simple ivory gown, her eyes never leaving his, he felt the same shift in his center of gravity that he had experienced the first time they met. In his vows, he thanked her for teaching him that true success wasn't measured in ships or stock prices, but in moments of connection and choice. Katerina, in turn, promised to always challenge his assumptions, support his dreams, and love him through both careful decisions and impulsive leaps of faith. As they exchanged rings and sealed their commitment with a kiss, Isaac knew with absolute certainty that of all the choices that had built his fortune and shaped his life, loving Katerina had been the wisest investment of all.